and we are live with Cat Discourse. Everyone, internet, please meet Carmel the cat. We might talk about some other stuff today, but what really matters is Cat. And so let's just get that out of the way right now. Let's just get started with something good, something very positive, something that everyone can agree on, which is that Cat. Yeah. There is Cat. There it is. I wanted to just welcome to the show. This has been something we tried to set this up for a couple of weeks. We had some technical difficulties, some scheduling difficulties on my end too. But finally, at last, Taylor, thank you so much for coming. Taylor is a Food Not Bombs volunteer in Indiana who wanted to come and talk about the type of activism that Food Not Bombs does. I personally think Food Not Bombs is extremely inspiring and important work. And so I was really happy to facilitate that. Taylor, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So let's just jump in. For people that aren't familiar with Food Not Bombs already, would you give like the elevator pitch? What is Food Not Bombs? What is this organization doing?
Well, Food Not Bombs has been feeding hungry people around the world with local chapters for decades. And they feed people without restrictions, despite opposition from feds. But historically, this opposition has actually strengthened support for Food Not Bombs.
Yeah, and that leads perfectly into my story with Food Not Bombs that I wanted to tell. My first exposure to Food Not Bombs, this is actually one of the things that helped push me to the left over time. My exposure to Food Not Bombs is that they have been active in my city for a long time. And particularly when I was around the time I graduated high school, which I'm not going to say because I feel old today. Around the time I graduated high school, Food Not Bombs was very active in my city, which is Albuquerque, New Mexico. And they were also, because they were very active, they were experiencing a lot of resistance from local lawmakers and law enforcement. And in particular, the city council was kind of giving them a lot of pushback and a lot of trouble, not really wanting to allow them to do things the way they wanted to do it. And I was kind of a lib back then. So when I first heard about this struggle, I was kind of like, well, why aren't Food Not Bombs organizers just doing the permitting correctly and like being lib about it? But then because I was hearing about it so much, I kept getting informed. And so it didn't just stop at like the first time I heard that headline had my dumbass 18-year-old liberal reaction to it and then moved on. I kept hearing about this issue. And the more I heard about it, the more I was like, hey, they're really not being reasonable here. I mean, what Food Not Bombs is trying to do is a very simple thing that shouldn't really require regulation necessarily at all. Is the stance I kind of eventually landed on. And I know that can be controversial, but look, the difference between unsafe food and no food is still like food, is like still having food. And the reality is that Food Not Bombs has rarely ever been accused of any kind of like serving unsafe food. In fact, we know that statistically speaking, it is rarely the small producers of food of any kind that are serving unsafe food. Where you get unsafe food, it's in massive batches of lettuce that contain salmonella. It's things like that. It's not, it comes from giant corporations. So anyway, enough about me talking about it though. Taylor, you should jump in here and just talk about, the struggles that Food Not Bombs faces and why it's so important that Food Not Bombs be allowed to do this work without jumping through these legal hoops.
Right. So Food Not Bombs is a lot of stuff. Like, for instance, our chapter gets pushback from the police for any little slip up we do. Like if we're parked wrong, the cops are sitting right there before the meal share always to intimidate us. And one time when it was raining, we tried to share underneath of a bridge, and there was a big hassle about that. And so we don't do that anymore. And now we got our own tent. But very small things can create a big hassle, and there's always intimidation. in other chapters, like the Vegas chapter, they were able to create like structures for unhoused folks, small structures, and in a small community, like 18 of them. And the feds are, always threatening to raid these structures and destroy them. And it's just a cycle of this.
Yeah. And of course, like, it doesn't matter, even if you wanted to, quote unquote, follow all the rules. This isn't about that at the end of the day. They're looking for excuses. This is what I ultimately learned when I was investigating what was happening here. It doesn't matter what you're doing. They're looking for excuses to penalize you because they don't like what you're doing, period.
Yeah, the FBI already categorized Food Not Bombs as a terrorist organization for feeding people free food because helping others is criminalized and demonized, and it's terrible.
Yeah, I mean, that's just very insane to even think about, right? I mean, calling feeding people a terroristic act at that point, what is it that if this is terrorism, what values? Terrorism has to be in opposition to something, fundamentally, as like an idea. Okay, terrorism can't exist unless it's like able to harass or diminish or like demean some idea or philosophy, group, or culture or something, right? Like, so what idea is it that you're undermining, that you are terrorizing? Who is terrorized? That's insane. I mean, that's very, I mean, but it's very typical of the way that these things are treated, because anything that presents a real solution to the problems of homelessness, anything that's presenting real solutions to the problems of homelessness will be rejected by capitalism.
Right. I thought of a quote here from the Food Not Bombs Hungry for Peace book by Keith McHenry. On page 19, it says, "It is a radical political act in today's wasteful society to recover large amounts of food in an organized and consistent manner to share with the hungry."
Yeah. Let's talk about that book for a minute.
What?
So Hungry for Peace. What, for people who may not be familiar with it at all, what is the history behind the publication of that book, and why should maybe people look into picking it up?
Okay. I think what you're asking me is like, why was the book made?
Kind of, and like, yeah, what was what kind of led to the creation of it?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, 30 years of Food Not Bombs experience, because Keith McHenry was one of the co-founders, led to this. So this is going to be history, advice, manual to start new chapters, this types of things. It started in 1980, so now it would be 40 years, but this book is a little bit old, but still very relevant. And there is a free PDF.
Yeah. When I saw the free PDF, I was very excited. I was hoping you'd mention that. So yeah, everybody should go check that out. I don't have the link handy because unfortunately I am very bad at hosting, apparently, this show, and I should have had the link ready. But I will have the link ready before the time the show has ended. So don't worry, it will be on screen before long. That's really cool. So yeah, let's just talk a little bit about, so you've been doing this, how long have you been doing this volunteer work for Food Not Bombs?
I've been volunteering for Food Not Bombs specifically for a little bit over a year, because I found out about them myself at a reproductive rights rally and protest that I was a part of, and they were serving in solidarity, and it really resonated with me. And I'm already a lifelong volunteer, and the fact that there was no restrictions really resonated with me. And so I got to cooking and using my talents.
Cool. And this is the link to that PDF, by the way, and you can just Google Hungry for Peace free PDF and you'll find this pretty much instantly. But I just wanted to make sure that got on the screen at some point. I meant to have that link ready beforehand, but so that's cool. So what have your experiences been like volunteering for Food Not Bombs? Like, what is the general need that they have when they're asking for volunteer help? What kind of stuff do you do? What kind of stuff do other people do? Like, what is basically like, if someone was to be like, hey, maybe I want to get involved with that, what could they expect in terms of volunteering?
Okay. So are you asking me what are some roles for volunteers? Is that what you're asking me?
Sure, but you could also tell some stories if you want. I mean,
Okay. First I'll tell about the roles. So first of all, even just spreading the word online, if you never leave your house, is a vital and valid role. Just talking about Food Not Bombs is great. Starting conversations is great. Also, cooking, like I said, that's my talent. So I cook. My chapter, we do potluck style. So I cook in my house, I bring it and serve. So even if you just want to show up and you want to serve, if you want to contact people, I was contacting every single library branch about getting our flyers in there about Food Not Bombs. So if you want to sit and call people, or if you want to sit and email people, if that's your type of thing, if you want to contact businesses about donating, that's good too. Even just driving, that's a good thing. If you have a car, that's important. If you have a car, they'll be able to use you no matter what. Anything you can use. And it's theater, it's art. We include literature, everything. So if you can sing, if you can do art, if you can create in any way, come, they'll find a way for you. DM me, I'll help you get connected.
I just want to talk about that. You mentioned the car thing. I want to really touch on that for a second, because a lot of mutual aid networks and projects, political projects that come directly out of the poor and working class communities that, like, I've been a part of my whole life, that a lot of the people I know have been a part of their whole life. You might, if you have lived a more comfortable lifestyle, underestimate the value of reliable transportation. Yeah, a lot of organizations, you would be surprised how many organizations are just struggling for someone to go pick some people up and take them somewhere or drop them off after a meeting. Because reliable
donations.
Absolutely, pick up donations, because reliable transportation is not something that everybody involved in these groups has. Because a lot of these mutual aid, like these fundamental building block mutual aid type groups, Food Not Bombs is not being run by a lot of like PMC type wealthy suburbanites. It's working class people for the most part.
Yeah.
And a lot of them barely have enough food to bring something out, and they still do. Like, that's been my experience with Food Not Bombs. So yeah, just bringing things like that. It might seem simple, like the tools that you have might seem simple, but it's not for organizations for this kind of mutual aid work. And I think I just want to put that out there in part because I think people overestimate the kind of skills that's required to do mutual aid organizing. Especially because a lot of organizing has been made like so weird and bureaucratic that like it's intimidating to get involved with. But Food Not Bombs isn't really organized in such a intensive way.
No bureaucracy, nothing like that. Consensus style decision making, and everyone is equal. That includes the people that come to eat too, not just the volunteers, you know?
I'm willing to speak on this as well, but Taylor, I feel like you might be kind of, based on just things I've seen you post, uniquely qualified to speak to the ways that bureaucracy presents a disadvantage for people that aren't neurotypical or in certain kinds of other situations.
Yeah, for sure. So accessibility is key, right? And sometimes it can look like things are accessible, but that's not really true. So trying to apply for these government help things and you're going through these hoops, it's not really accessible to everyone. And I used to volunteer at a place where they'll make you show proof of address. That means you can't be homeless to get the food.
Right.
That's enough, you know, and there was other hoops to jump through too, but it's just like, you shouldn't have to jump through any hoops at all, because that causes more stress and more trauma on top of scarcity trauma. You know, poverty is violence, and it shouldn't be the case. So mutual aid is love, though.
And poor people's time is very important, you know, because it's one thing. I mean, this isn't even just like the absolute wealthy, but even if you just come from like a fairly middle class, comfortable background, a lot of people, they kind of like, they knew relatively what career they were going to go into. They went into college without worrying how it was going to be paid for. They came out of college and they went straight into a career that they know that they're basically going to have forever if that's what they choose, right? Poor people don't have any of those luxuries that I just mentioned. Okay, so like, you don't have that confidence in the kind of things that you can do. If you don't come from a relatively comfortable background, you may not feel confident pursuing the actual like dreams and ambitions that you really care about, because you might think, well, I have to try to make money or whatever. Pursuing college is challenging for poor people. I was not able to finish college because of financial reasons and because I chose not to take on student debt. One of the few good decisions I made as a very young person, and I'm very grateful for it. And so, yeah, when you talk about this bureaucratic, one of the things that bureaucracy does to poor people is it just wastes their time. And when you are poor and you are trying to get ahead, when you cannot just be comfortable where you are at, because where you are at is not comfortable.
Right. Uncertainty is not comfortable.
Right.
Having no options is not comfortable.
Not knowing if your housing is solid is not comfortable. Trust me. Not knowing if your food situation is solid is not comfortable. When you're dealing with these kinds of things. So when you need to get ahead, you can't just stay where you are. Then all of your time is very valuable in this way that people don't understand, that just have the time to waste because, they get off work. And as long as, everything was good again at the workday, then they basically have no worries, right? Like, I mean, sure, like, I'm not trying to discount the fact that, like, we're all being abused by the capitalist system. And of course, like, that's why I said, if it was a good day, if it wasn't a good day, then maybe you're worrying about getting fired. And maybe you're now wondering if your security is so secure. So totally, like, we can all be in this situation. But for the people who are actively living that discomfort, presenting bureaucratic barriers is pretty much a type of violence. So that's one of the things I love about Food Not Bombs, following a very simple, just to the point organizational structure that doesn't lend itself to a lot of people being shut out by paperwork, neither from the access to the help, but also to the access to the organizing, because that's something a lot of organizations make it hard for people to get involved. And Food Not Bombs doesn't do that at all, wouldn't you say?
Right. The non-hierarchical structure not only protects them from co-optation, it should encourage, each chapter is autonomous. You need to remember this, but it should be encouraging for every new volunteer and every new person that comes to eat should be welcomed, and made in the group. You're not just a newbie that can't really speak yet. You are a part of the family and you get a say and you get to know what's going on. And you get to, put your thoughts and your creativity in.
Yeah, I think that's so critical. Like you say, you're not the newbie who can't speak. How many organizations? I think a lot of people out there watching will probably immediately relate to this, because I know a lot of y'all who watch this show are also organizers like we are. How many organizations do you have to join? And then a lot of them won't tell you up front that you don't really get rights right away. They'll make it sound like, oh yeah, come on board. It's great. You're going to be treated as whatever. Like, but then you get there and it's like, oh, that you need to sit in for X number of meetings before you're allowed to propose agenda items, or, like, things like that. Whereas like Food Not Bombs and other completely non-hierarchical organizations that I've been around, it's like, no, somebody walks in, you never seen them before, and they say, hey, here's my concern. If it sounds valid to the group, you start talking about it and maybe you do something about it.
Right.
There's no 10 steps of paperwork where it might kind of get lost in the shuffle between like step 6 and 7 and just forgotten about.
And that makes you feel heard, and a lot of people in the community are, that makes me think of another quote, guys. Y'all, excuse me. Many people think that they are alone in feeling that society is failing, and are relieved to discover that Food Not Bombs not only shares their concerns, but is offering a path to seeking solutions. page 36. And that's true though. That's true because a woman walked past our meal share table and she told me, she told all of us that she resonated with what we were doing so much she wanted to cry. And I mean, was being so honest about it and so raw. And that's how I felt too, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really important. What do you think might be, just in your opinion, this is just an opinion question. What do you think might be one of like the limitations that prevents more organizations from adopting this kind of structure? Do you think there's something special about the type of work that Food Not Bombs does? Or do you think that that more organizations could do this and they just won't?
Well, I know the book specifically talks about it, and I know that the problem with just some organizations I've known, you know, throughout my experiences is that they are not wanting to challenge the root causes. And we spoke about that a little bit. And so they, you know, speaking out, because Food Not Bombs speaks out, they share literature, they're doing this too. And so some people are going to feel tentative and about this, you know, they're going to feel neutral and not want to stir things up really. But, you know, that's not going to, putting a Band-Aid on something is not going to create any changes for root causes. But I mean, the basic thing is that you have to know that there's surplus food everywhere. You know, scarcity is a myth. That's what they'll tell you. There's surplus food all in your community. You got to think about it. You know, I used to work at Wendy's. We used to throw away a lot of stuff at the end of the day.
Also, what household doesn't occasionally throw away food?
Right,
we know that there's food waste in our own households.
I don't want to put it on individuals.
No, of course not. But I think it's still worth noting. And here's the thing. I would never say, oh, it's our job to figure out the entire solution. But I would say if we could come up with an organized solution that was eliminating some of that household waste through like an organized method, you know, because like, again, I'm just saying it's out there.
It is. But if you think about it, they'll tell you why the scarcity is the myth is that we usually don't have to, the volunteers usually don't have to buy their own ingredients to cook with and to share with because there's an overflow of donations. If we search hard enough, you know, if you're patient, you know, and you're confident, you search hard enough, then actually there's an overflow of donations you can get as long as you can get transportation to pick them up and you can have people that have time to pick it up. You know, so that's seriously, there's an overflow out there that really, most of the time we don't have to use our own ingredients, but sometimes we do. And yeah, it's not good to just hoard things in your home. That's not good. But all these companies are hoarding things. Yeah,
on a massive scale.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't even compare to your 3 cans of green beans or whatever.
Right. And restaurants too, local bakeries, local groceries. You got to think, just call them. Just call them.
Yeah, I think restaurants in particular have been a good source in my city for the Food Not Bombs group here. And at least as I understand, I mean, I don't know. I haven't been current with like what they're doing now, but it was before. Let's just say that. And yeah, because the restaurants really, they have even less incentive to throw it away than the grocery stores who have these weird relationships to like the product that can make it harder to talk them into it. But restaurants in particular, that's a market that people need to tap into because they are throwing away a lot of food and a lot of restaurants don't want to. They just straight up, they don't want to be throwing away that food, but they don't have a lot.
They need a reliable way to dispose it. So that means volunteers getting transportation and doing it and taking the time every week or something, you know, because we used to get stuff from Panera, but then they stopped because we didn't have enough volunteers to consistently go. And Panera was frustrated with that, really, and didn't put up with it.
Yeah. Again, these very small things that you might not think of as big things can really help an organization like this, like I was saying before.
Yeah.
And it really, transportation, it really is too bad that transportation in this country is such an issue in general. And of course, like, just taking weird things onto a bus can get you thrown off, right? You know what I mean? It's like, it's not even just an option to say, oh, I'll send someone on the bus to come like take it in bags or whatever back.
Yeah, that's not an option.
No.
That's really not.
Yeah, so it really does help when people with reliable transportation can get involved with stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah, okay, that's really cool. So I want to ask you this: was there a point after you started getting involved with Food Not Bombs? Was there like a moment where you were like, "This is for sure the organization for me"? Um,
I mean, as soon as they were probably at the protest, I was just like, okay, that's what I'm about, you know, because I could maybe I didn't know all these words and these quotes that I read in the book yet,
sure.
but I have my own discernment and I knew, hey, that's what's up. Being in the action, being in the street, you know, because they don't have buildings, they don't have things like that. Being in the action, meeting people where they are and serving in solidarity about important things and recognizing that protesters and rioters need food, you know, that's
Mhm.
I really resonated with that.
What's the political community like in your where you are? Like, what's like the demographics, and what are people's like big concerns that are like weighing on them?
Okay. Well, I live in Fort Wayne, Indiana. It's kind of small, like about a quarter million people, and it seems to be in this cornfield, it seems to be like a lot of Republicans and stuff.
Hmm.
So the Food Not Bombs chapters is a breath of fresh air for most folks, and for me too, right? And I didn't know that they were in my city for 8 years until I see them at this protest, you know. And I've been to a few protests, and I'm actively seeking things out in my
Hmm.
community. So I was like, geez, if it's that hard for me to find, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. So accessibility is key, and I try and spread the word myself. Uh,
What's the conservative? Yeah, I'm curious. What's the conservative response like in your area to Food Not Bombs? Because mostly what I've dealt with here and what I've seen here that they're dealing with is the neoliberal response because of like the type of political climate that I live in. But what do you get any positive response from the conservatives, or are they pretty just like,
They are across the street at the courthouse having their own protest about anti-mask. That's all the conservatives are doing. For real. That happened on a Sunday at one of
oh
our,
no,
and
oh
so
no?
usually they're leaving us alone except for the actual like police will, you know, say
Hmm.
stuff. But people walking past usually aren't, they'll just stay away. If they don't want to be a part of what we're doing, they usually stay away. Because a lot of people don't really know. But some people walking past are happy, like a woman I told you about earlier.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
you don't know what her political stance is. I don't know.
Sure, and you don't know who you might bring around. I mean, that's
Right.
yeah, that's something. I'm sure that you actually. Let's talk about that. I'm sure that you know people that uh were not always woke that are now doing this type of volunteering, right? Like,
Yeah, probably. I think that for you, your story really resonated with me. And I think that a lot of people that have been coming recently to my meal share,
mhm,
volunteers and people that came to a woman that came to get a donation. She just went on and on and on about just venting about how she felt like the system wasn't good, and obviously she was preaching to the choir, you know, especially about higher education for profit being a scam and unethical. And I'm like, yeah, I wish I could go to college. I know, I feel you. So I think a lot of people are just like, I don't know what her political stance is really, but I think that she's just starting to realize these things and state them out loud. And and she would talk about these, you know, Trump supporters and Republicans, like, how are you believing these things, you know? And so I think she's starting to feel community. And when you start to
mhm.
feel community and you start to resonate with other people and they can teach you their ideas, you know, like you go more left and you start to believe in human rights and
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, we've talked enough about that, I think, for today. But we can like let's talk a little bit about just some funny things that are in the news, and especially we had talked about this before the show. I wanted to get your takes on the fridge discourse in particular. So the New York Times put out an article, and the gist of it was, can you tell if someone's going to vote for Biden or Trump based on what's in their fridge? And we did some of the quiz and we did okay, but we found ourselves kind of feeling like there wasn't actually a lot that you could necessarily like really ascribe, in terms of food to a political philosophy.
I'm sorry about this.
Oh, it's okay. I understand. My cats are the same trouble all the time.
It's asthma. It's asthma, everyone. This is an inhaler. That's what's happening.
Oh. So, what do you think about? Do you think? First of all, let me say, what's in your fridge, Taylor? What if you were to describe just like some average items that can always be found in your fridge?
Oh.
Pick like five or so items that can always be found in your fridge. Let's have them.
Okay, so since I started at Food Not Bombs, now it's definitely going to be some vegan butter sticks, almond milk, coconut milk yogurt, right now pre-cooked bacon, like the big pack, and eggs, but I don't use them.
Okay. All right. So let me ask you this. Do you think that you could tell who someone was going to vote for based on what was in their fridge? Do you think that like certain items, and like including maybe some of the items that you just listed, do you think that those would be definitive, like kind of belong to one political group or another?
Of course, I can't say definitive. Of course, we know that's not true. But if it was maybe all vegan, I would think, maybe that's a Democrat going for Biden.
And see, that's where you would have been surprised if you had been on the stream with us yesterday, because the fridge that had the most soy milk in it was a Trump voter.
Well, that could be dietary restrictions that they can't control,
They had it was just like a very healthy fridge in general, but so I guess you don't know entirely.
Yeah, it's not definitive.
It's not. I really don't think that the type of food that you eat, I think that there are some indicators and that you could probably guess more right than wrong if you like learned what those indicators were, probably, but it might not be by a large margin. I think people don't tend to necessarily eat 100% in a way that aligns with their political beliefs, although I think that used to be more of a thing.
Yeah,
like
I think that, like their disabilities or, their whatever their choices are for their life, might just be a personal thing,
Also just income. I think if you look at a lot of low income fridges, there's going to be similar foods in them regardless of what kind of person they are. I will say that I think the thing that we discovered that was the biggest tell was that if the state of their fridge indicated that they had a lot of kids, they were probably a Trump voter. That was the one thing that we did learn. That was like, if you look like you're making lunch for 6 kids, you're a Trump voter.
Weird. Oh my
gosh. But yeah, I think honestly, even like the era that Food Not Bombs was kind of originally born out of was more of a time when I think like kind of the hippie movement and that like those political movements.
Yeah.
But like that the dregs of the hippie movement were still like, even if they were weak, it was the strongest left that existed in the 80s.
Yeah.
So it was like they still kind of controlled like that still kind of controlled the narrative of what people thought about as the left for the most part. And I think there was more of an association back then with like the food that you eat and like a political ideology. I don't feel like that's as true now. Like I don't feel like the modern movements of politics are really as deeply associated with food in general and like the quality or sort of the types of it. But there obviously are some groups that are deeply entwined. I don't know. What do you think about all of that? Like, what do you think? Do you think that there are like food-based political movements that might take off? I'm giving you an opportunity here and you know it.
I'm missing it. I'm confused at your question. Can you please reword it real quick for me?
Like, do you think there are some specifically food-based, like diet-based political movements that are on the rise right now, or that we might see more of in terms of like left-wing spaces.
Okay, I don't know if this is exactly what you're talking about, but I know with Food Not Bombs, they serve vegan and vegetarian food, and each chapter is autonomous. But some chapters push the vegan really hard, and some vegans themselves can be a little militant, and which is the complete opposite of Food Not Bombs. So I think that's a little thing. But does that answer your question? I don't know.
Not exactly, but I think that leads us into like a discussion potentially because, yeah, I mean, I think that's like the number one. I think like the left vegan movement is like the number one thing that sort of exists in terms of like a specifically current like diet based sort of like political philosophy kind of intersection point that's like it's somewhat popular. But yeah, Food Not Bombs, this has been something that has like literally torn chapters apart, this issue. What's your personal stance on like where do you think the lines should be drawn around this stuff personally, and what do you think is reasonable? And this is just you. This is not definitive. This is just you.
In general, I think you're not a bad person if you eat meat. I know that there's lots of reasons, like disabilities and cultures and anything for your money, anything for why you would eat meat. You're not a bad person for that. I know that each chapter is autonomous and they should be able to come to a logical and respectable decision on that. If they can't, then I would think that someone could start their own chapter where they're not so strict on dietary restrictions and that vegan and vegetarians can mix and it doesn't have to be one or the other, and that no shame should be happening. No shame should be happening.
It definitely feels like to me, and I know someone might get upset with me about this, and hey, if you watch this and you get really upset and you want to talk to me about it, maybe I'll bring you on the show. Reach out to me. But it definitely seems to me like there is if the imperative is to not waste food, then we should be not wasting all food to some extent. You know what I mean? Like that,
Right.
like there should be like a use of whatever food is around that's going to be wasted.
Right.
As opposed to being very strict about we should maybe follow this diet or that diet. That's a pragmatic thing to me. Again, I know someone will probably watch this and get upset maybe, but
there's no reason to get upset, but other people can do their things. This is what they're doing. They're focusing on the major surplus everywhere of vegan and vegetarian food. So if someone else wants to focus on, the surplus of other things and they want to serve people without restrictions, that's great for them. And I hope they really go do it. Start talking about it, do that.
I mean, I'm not even thinking as much about like the meat, but just on the vegan vegetarian line in particular, I feel like eggs is something that can get wasted in large numbers.
We have an egg donation person that's, they got so many, 21 chickens. I mean, who can eat that many eggs?
That's a lot. Yeah, and that's a critical like bedrock food that you can feed people that will like help them to like get protein, nutrients, So it's like it's a good food to feed someone who's hungry, and it's also something that like tends to be overly available in a lot of cases, and that's something that like I would definitely feel like, come on. Right. That's me though. That's me. Again, every chapter is autonomous, which is actually something I love about it, like you do. So every chapter has the ability to make these decisions. And I think that, it really depends on your community and what's available to some extent, probably what even makes sense. But I would definitely personally say you should be a little pragmatic about this stuff, in my opinion. We got to feed people first and foremost.
Yeah. Be flexible, be reliable.
And just, absolutely. Just trying to solve people's issues on the most basic level first is always more important in my mind than pushing a perfect ideology. But at the same time, I will concede that every action you take affects the, what is produced in the food system, including these actions. So, if you want to make that argument, I would hear you out, but I don't agree.
Right. And also, vegan food doesn't spoil as often sometimes, but there's lots of things you can do to use your head and to make things as strategic as possible.
Yeah, and I think honestly, I'll just say this. This is just me being even more on my soapbox. But as far as the perishable foods thing goes, we really need to, like, as Americans, get more on it with our cooking in general and learn how people used to preserve food a little bit more, because like it's ridiculous that people can't figure out how to make a meal like last in the fridge a couple days because like we've lost so many of these skills.
Right.
And it's no individual's fault. Again, this is not a blame the individual. I would actually say, if anything, our educational system is one of the biggest failures here. I posted something. It was the funniest thing. I posted something on Twitter the other day about how like, if you think geometric proofs are more important than learning how to cook, you're insane, basically, or something like that.
Right.
And somebody commented, well, anybody who thinks one or the other is more important is crazy. And I'm like, well, every school in America has eliminated home ec practically. So like there's a lot of crazy people out there, like
right. And food is a very basic right, you can't learn math if you're hungry and you're not.
Yes, that's the quote of the fucking episode. You can't learn math if you're hungry. Yes, both of those things might have some importance, but you literally, if you don't know how to like find some food and cook it into a meal or like whatever, like if you can't accomplish that, then you're not going to learn the mathematics in the first place. Honestly, I think we could probably wrap on that because that's the best thought of the day. We're not going to come up with anything smarter. Taylor, is there anything that you would like to plug or promote, either like organizations or things that you personally have going on before we get out of here?
Oh, art therapy. Okay, let me just say that every single human has the need, the right, and the ability to be creative. All right?
Hell yeah. So I'll just give the full plug for you. I follow Taylor on Twitter. Follow her on Twitter if you're interested in art therapy as a topic, because it's something that she's actively posting about all the time, doing some cool stuff.
Some prompts.
Yeah, like active. It's not just like ideas, but like a get involved. I love that. So go check that out at MySpace Fiend on Twitter, which is a great handle. I like that a lot. As for our show, if you want to get more involved with our show, show a little support. First of all, the easiest thing you can do is just head on over to youtube.com/notsafemedia and subscribe, like the video, do all that stuff. It just helps us raise in the algorithm. And it really helps because we're trying to make money off of this show. Just to be completely transparent, we are all poor that make this show. And it would be great to get some of those YouTube dollars. So head over there, youtube.com/notsafemedia. Also, if you just want to throw us a couple bucks directly, patreon.com/notsafe. And throw us $5. It makes a huge difference. And it will give you access to tons of extra content that we make, including post shows that come after our streams on some days, and exclusive audio content, all kinds of stuff. And it just helps support truly 100% independent media that is talking about this type of real activism that is just direct on the ground. This is the kind of thing that we absolutely believe in. So once again, Taylor, thank you so much for coming to talk about it. Share all of your wisdom from the Food Not Bombs world. I appreciate you making the time.
Thank you so much, Kennedy.
All right. Bye-bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.